What if the path to peak performance isn't about grinding harder, but becoming more aware? In today's episode, I sit down with Michael Ostralenk, a high performance coach who has trained Navy SEALs, studied transpersonal psychology, and spent decades helping people unlock human potential. We talk resilience, recovery, and what it really means to live an integrated, purpose driven life. If you've ever felt stuck between who you are and who you could become, this conversation is for you. Michael Ostralenk, welcome to the EOR podcast. Let's go. Transcending limits, exploring human potential is where we're going to start today. And when I hear those words, I immediately think of David Goggins.
Okay.
But mostly because, well, I mean, he's all over social media, even though he prefers really not to be. But and I know you've done work with military personnel, and so when I think of really pushing human limits, really reaching potential, transcending that ability that the human body has and the human mind has, I think of him. Now, maybe I'm stretching it a bit far because that's an extreme example, but tell me what that means to you, because we talk a lot about potential. It's a word that gets thrown around maybe a little too often. Same thing with resilience, and we'll get into that in a second. But what does transcending human limits and building human potential mean to you in your practice and the people you work with?
Actually, I love the fact you brought up David Goggins as kind of an exemplar. A colleague of mine, JC Glick, and I co-lead a men's group called Resilience Optimized, and we talk about Resilience 2.0. We literally had our first class last night, which is awesome that you and I are talking today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the distinction between 2.0 and 1.0 is useful for the purpose of the conversation, the question you just asked. So, like we always say, like David Goggins is an exemplar of 1.0. Like you wake up before breakfast and you run 100 miles, or if you want to stick with naval special warfare, Jocko Willink, you get up at 4:30 in the morning, you lift weights. All that stuff is great to a certain extent. There's got to be a dynamic balance with life and stuff like that. But like, yes, it's important to be physically capable and to constantly push your physical limits as long as you're causing health consequences. So that is important.
Yeah.
But basically, my contention, the contention that JC and I have in this men's group run is 2.0 is that plus. Yeah, you want to have an optimized physical body. You want to be really capable. As a man, you want to be able to protect your family against threats. You want to be able to like carry your child out of a burning building, like physically capable on day-to-day activities of life that might come your way. Cool. That's awesome. But I would say that another aspect of resilience that we talk about is one, and there's like three different areas that we talk about. One, are you actually capable of sitting in your own experience for longer periods of time without seeking distraction? Porn, drugs, alcohol, Netflix, working out. Like we men and humans have a lot, especially these days with social media, have a lot of things we can do to distract ourselves from our own experience. As someone who's been practicing this as a therapist and as a coach, but for almost 30 years now, if you actually don't feel your feelings, which is different than expressing them, I want to make that distinction. We can talk about that. If you don't feel your feelings, one or two things most likely will happen. They'll come out sideways as passive aggressive behavior, which your wife, friends, family members, kids aren't going to particularly like that. Or it can come out as chronic health conditions over the long haul. That's also not something you want to strive for. So how do you just sit with your own experience? Because when you have thoughts across your mind, emotions across the energetics of the body, and you can look at them as like, oh my God, I don't like whatever that is. I want to repress it and distract myself. Or, and this is the kind of the human potential expansion kind of approach, is like that's useful information about what's happening inside myself, either about something inside myself and or about my relationship to a situation or a person. Valuable information. Let's allow it to process through the system and then give us some input on how we might want to behave down the road as we move forward, whatever that needs to be. So for me, human potential is not just like, hey, carrying heavy shit long distance, which is awesome, or long runs or heavyweight lifting. It's like, hey, can I actually sit in my own experience? Can I sit with someone else while they're having their experience? What emotions are running wild? Can I sit and regulate myself? Can I manage myself, not repress myself? Can I learn to healthily express myself? For me, a lot of that is the cutting edge of human development.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that, and I have a lot of questions off of what you said, but sitting in that human experience, not only just your own, but with others. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that's
yeah.
something on a personal level that I've continually tried to work on, especially in the last 5 to 7 years. But I think that's something that really everybody can work on. I think we tend to, when we're with others, we tend to listen to respond as opposed to listen to understand. We don't take time, we don't take that maybe that deep breath before responding to things, or maybe not responding at all. But everybody's personality is a little bit different. So how do you teach the masses, because everyone's personality is different, to
Yeah.
find that regulation within themselves to not overshoot emotionally, but then not undershoot as well? Like, where's that fine balance?
These are perfect questions and very timely. So I literally just taught a course this morning on that, so it's a little bit fresh in my mind.
Yeah.
And my basic intention is this: if you look psychodynamically, the question is, why did something happen that caused a particular set of behaviors for you? When I was 5, my mother said this, my father said that, and I created a defense mechanism, and that's how I respond to the world. That's kind of interesting. As a therapist, that's kind of interesting. But the question I ask, this is to answer your question, is how do we do what we do? Not why. Why is interesting. And, finding out when it first entered the human system and yeah, and got locked in as a reactive state. Cool. But how do we do it? And what I mean by that is, if like let's say you and I are working together. You said, "Hey, Michael, when I have a conversation, you have a son or a daughter or family member, some family member, when he or she says X, Y, and Z, I get really pissed off. I get really angry, and I lose my cool, and I just say stuff that I'm not really that I don't at the moment I mean, but it's caused damage to the relationship. So my first question for you, and I'm trained as a somatic therapist, body psychologist. So I always go to the body as part of the larger human system. Question I was asked is, "Hey Quinn, what do you mean by you're angry?" Oh, I'm angry. Okay, that's a word, it's a concept. I get that. We can have a whole conversation. How do you know you're angry? And what I find from a lot of people are like, I'm just angry. All right, let's calm down. Let's just sit with your experience. How do you know internally to yourself that you're angry? And you might go, well, yeah, I'm sitting with it, and I notice like when I do get angry, my jaw gets tight, right? And my heart gets faster. I hold my breath, or I do chest breathing. Various physiological responses, posture, muscle tone. There's maybe a particular series of words you hear with a tone and a volume. So there's a whole gestalt of how you personally do what you call anger. For me, that's the first step, becoming aware of how you do what you do. Because once you know how you do it, and you can learn how to, you become aware of it almost to the moment it occurs in your system. Like most people takes, let's just say you're fighting with your spouse, and you're an hour into the argument, you're like, oh shit, I did it again. And you're becoming more and more aware through somatic practices. And you're like, oh, okay, 30 minutes in, and then 20 minutes in, and 10 minutes in. And eventually you get to the point where you're like seconds away from being triggered or activated, and you can see it happening. Your jaw gets tight, you're holding your breath, you're getting this. That's the moment you can do a pause and interdict that state and change your state. You can do cognitive practices, like you can do a mantra. You can do breath practices. You can do muscle contraction practices to relax the muscles and the fascia. Various things you can do, and I teach all these things people for you to do, with the intent of like, if I can relax the system, open my breathing up, I'm more active to the prefrontal cortex. I'm less sympathetically activated. I can take better decisions. I can be more clear in my communication. I can still feel that I'm frustrated or angry or whatever it is, but I'm not reactive from that space.
Hmm.
And my goal with clients is like, I'm not saying deny how you feel, but I want you to be a choice in how you respond to that person, not reactive programming from your childhood.
It's interesting you brought that up. The first podcast we did here, episode 1, was with a breathing specialist. She's a physiotherapist as well, a yoga instructor, and we talked about the
Nice.
somatic experience. It was a beautiful first episode to have, because I learned from myself that yes, I feel all those, bodily reactions. So the heart starts to, increase its pace, and, I get a bit flushed and so forth. Here's an example of what you're talking about, at least for me, is that, for example, if I get into a bit of a not a disagreement even, but I start chatting with my wife and I say something that obviously triggered her, or vice versa. If I were to just take in that moment and take a few extra seconds to maybe incorporate a breathing technique, or just try to not respond immediately and allow things to happen. If I don't respond within 10 seconds, her response is, "Oh, so now we're not talking?" Because
Okay.
I am typically, now we're getting into therapy. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I'm typically an immediate responder. Okay. And you're right. I've learned that this does go back to my childhood. This is something I respond in defense. I respond to feedback, to defend myself. And when I hear something that triggers me, I immediately respond to try to almost like get it out of the way or defend myself. And so if I'm in a situation where I need to take those extra 5 or 10 seconds to try and breathe through it, or use some form of protocol, the person who knows me best, obviously my wife, is looking at me like, why aren't you responding? Why aren't you talking? Why aren't you, saying something? So how would you handle that now that I've exposed?
Yeah, no, I love that. First of all, thank you, Quinn, for sharing. That's
Yeah,
great, because I think it's a good talking point and way to kind of walk through this.
yeah.
It's perfect, because when I work with couples, individuals, and I co-lead men's groups. So when I work with couples, there are three pillars I work with, and you're nailing the first one: agreements. Most of what we do in a relationship is not consciously agreed upon. We bring in old habits from our family of origin, our culture, our geography, our religion, our ethnicity, all kinds of different forces. It unconsciously engage with our partner, and we create these kind of unspoken agreements. So what I would do if I was working with you guys is a couple of different things. I would have that conversation out loud. So your wife thinks that if you're not speaking within the first 5 or 10 seconds, that you're disengaging from her.
Mm,
So there's a belief system there.
yep.
I would unpack her belief system. I'd unpack your desire immediately to respond, and that you're attempting not to because you want to be, I guess, a little bit more mindful. And that could be a new agreement. Once she understands that it's not that you're disengaging because you want to walk away, you're actually going inside to check in with yourself before so you can be more mindful in the communication. She works through her stuff. She understands that you guys have this new agreement. So the new agreement is, when things begin to spiral, you do your thing, which is say, take a couple breaths, think about what's been said, and then hopefully operate from the heart place thing. And then whatever her part of that agreement is too, 'cause then she has to also agree to her behavior and accept your behavior. But it has to be agreed upon by both people. And then there's the second pillar, which fits into the first. But let me just stop there to see if that makes sense to you in terms of conversation to have with your wife, for example.
It actually does. And I remember her and I going through a counseling session where it was, I think it was, the format was called ABC. And it's like we were jumping from A to C immediately. We were not, and that's that belief system in the middle, the B, the belief system of like,
Yeah.
she believes if I don't respond that I've disengaged. I believe if, right, and you two have your sis. So now it becomes, we need to agree upon, and I've worked on this. It's like, okay,
Nice.
if I don't respond, I need you to know that I'm processing.
Yeah.
And I've even actually verbalized it, said, you know what, I need to
Perfect.
process this. I might come back
Yeah.
2 hours from now to give you a
Yeah.
response, because I want to make sure I don't respond inappropriately in the moment emotionally.
Perfect. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
It's a struggle.
Yeah.
But as a couple that's been together for 31 years, and anybody who's
Uh-huh.
in a relationship for that long, you work at these things. And that's really what marriage is all about, and relationships are all about. Even if it's just a friend you've known for a lot of years, or family member, you know each other so well, but then at the same time you need to figure out that those belief systems that you each hold, and how it can work for more positive growth, as opposed to,
Perfect.
debate and battle.
Perfect example. Would you mind if I walk through the other two pillars that support the agreement pillar? Would that be
Absolutely.
okay?
Tell me more.
Yeah. So the agreement, you guys come to a new agreement. You consciously choose how you want to interact in a particular situation. But just because you consciously choose to do that, which is a great first step, doesn't mean you're physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually capable of doing so. That's where the second pillar comes. And I work with individuals within the couple on healing old wounds, self-regulation, evolution of consciousness, and I can walk through what those mean. But like, you got to do the inner work as an individual within the couple so you can embody or live out those agreements. Because if you say, yes, I agree to do X, Y, and Z, and you don't, after a time, your partner's going to not trust you because you're untrustworthy.
Right.
You got to be doing the work to, like, I am going to do the work to not be reactive, to take that deep breath, to sit in contemplation, to remember us, not just me, whatever the practices are. And I'm going to heal that wound from when I was 5 or 7 or 10, which drives me to kind of act in a certain way. Cool. So I'm gonna work on the wound. I'm gonna heal the wound. I'm gonna learn to self-regulate the breath, the mantra, the bodily practices and stuff. So that way, when we have this conversation, I can show up as I've agreed to. That's the second pillar. I can touch upon the third pillar, but see if you have any questions on the second.
No, go ahead with the third.
Okay. The third one's co-regulation. I mean, you see this with a mother with a baby, breastfeeding. Like a baby cannot regulate its own temperature. The mother holds the baby and it teaches the baby over time to learn how to regulate itself, but the mother plays a role in regulation of the baby. Well, we do the same thing in couples. We can cause dysregulation or we can support co-regulation. Co-regulation could be as simple as you put your hand on her shoulder. She slaps your butt. You guys give each other a hug. You guys give each other a kiss. You dance while you're making dinner together. Actually, these are things that I recommend to clients.
Yeah.
There are certain practices, like I have clients face each other, eye contact, breathing together, hand on heart, and you look into the other person's soul through the eyes. Lots of different ways to be with another human being to co-regulate, where you relax each other's system, you create peace and connection and intimacy. And that's important too. And it doesn't have to be all serious. It can be quite playful. So like, let's just say you and your wife are about to break into your spiral of conflict. And one of the co-regulation practices that I teach clients might be something, well, I do teach them, but it's dependent on the individual and the couple and times forget. But is like, okay, can you say or do something really fucking funny that is gonna make you laugh and the other person laugh and realize this is stupid?
Yeah.
Or is there something you can physically do, like physical comedy, that's just going to break the spell? Everyone's going to laugh. And then you're like, oh, wait, we don't need to fight over the toothbrush. This is kind of silly. And it could be like moaning the person, ripping up your shirt. Or maybe there's a funny phrase you say that's meaningful for you both, whatever it happens to be. But you got to be mindful. Like, if you wait too long to do that, it's counterproductive because then they take themselves so seriously
Right.
that they're seeing you as attacking them. But if you can do it early enough, like you break the spell and then you guys can have a normal conversation. That's co-regulation. You guys come together and figure out how to work with each other to keep the connection, keep the intimacy, and not allow the conflict to dysregulate you guys.
And I think a lot of times it's funny. We call them beetle battles, which is those small
Yeah.
little nonsense argumentative fights that you have, which really mean nothing. It's like, well, I thought you wanted jam on your toast. No, I wanted peanut butter, like this dumb stuff. And
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
I would suggest a lot of those little battles you have with your partner, spouse, or the person you're in the longest relationship with are often just a reflection of the mood you're in the moment, and really it turns something into or nothing into something. And it's important to recognize that. But I like what you said about almost disarming the situation by doing something a little bit humorous, funny, and I've done that. That's kind of my way of handling things. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But you don't spend 32 years, 31 years together without having figured out how to get through these things. And some things you just let slide off your back. But I also in the moment will go, okay, I got to be curious, not judgmental here, and go, maybe she's having a bad day, maybe she's in a little bit of pain or whatever, and then I try to just breathe through it and let it go. But then there's some days where you're just like, no, I want to fight.
That happens, and that's fine. But I think you said a key word, curious.
Yeah.
Like, don't turn your partner into a rock. Oh, that's just who she or he is. Be curious, because like you said, maybe they're hungry, maybe they're not feeling well, maybe they've had a rough day.
Yeah.
Maybe they're angry at you. Like whatever the thing is, but have a conversation with them, ask them questions, ask them open-ended questions in such a way that you're not attacking them, so they can hear it as curiosity from love, and they can share with you, and that could disarm a conflict as well, or lead to a really deep conversation about unmet needs, for instance.
Yeah. Isn't it incredible how you can, when you do spend enough time with somebody, that even in silence you can tell whether something's wrong. or right. And I always found that, and I had another podcast where we talked about energy that people give off when they walk into a room, the energy they give off. I know that my wife and I, for example, our whole family is very high energy, and when the four of us, that my kids and my wife and I, are in the room together, it's there's an intensity there, even when it's all silent. There's a certain intensity that comes with it, and I love speaking about people's energies and the energy they give off in any given moment, and everybody has that. And I think you start to feel that in relationships. I want to go back to something you said earlier about, you were talking about resilience and potential, and I want to talk about men for a second here, because I'm seeing a lot of podcasts, a lot of messaging from people like Scott Galloway, from Stephen Bartlett's show, from Chris Williamson's podcast, about how this generation of males, Gen Z predominantly, millennials too, are lost. They have no identity. And we talk about drugs, alcohol, porn addiction, things like that. What is your opinion on what is happening in society today with, and maybe this is North America, I don't know, but with men, young men today, and how there is that loss of identity? Because I see it a little bit in my son, I see it in his friends for sure. But what's your take on that and why it's happening?
Yeah. So, like I said earlier, like these questions you're bringing up, it's amazing the timing of this because I literally been in conversations the last couple of weeks now with parents with kids in their 18, 19, 20, 21,
Yeah,
22, saying exactly the same thing. And I've heard this for a while now, and I do work with some young men as well. Uh, and part of the conversation is there's no rites of passage. Get laid, I mean, okay, but that doesn't make you a man. It just makes you being able to procreate. Like,
yeah,
you know, and we can have the conversation on rites of passage. Get drunk and get laid is like the kind of the gross thing in our culture.
yeah,
We can talk about that in a moment if you want. But so what I hear, and there, I don't want to disparage the group of people.
yeah,
So I think there are some qualities that have emerged which are good. So it's not that everything's bad. We're all going to hell. Every generation thinks the next generation sucks, but I do think there's some concerns, and I do hear lack of grit or resilience, lack of front side focus, lack of follow through, lack of empathy and ability to connect with another human being non technologically, like
mm,
actually having a conversation.
yeah,
And then even some just general lack of skills, like resume building, engaging in an interview process for a job, like basic stuff that you and I probably grew up on learning secondhand. Like that's just kind of what you learn how to do is how to do those things. I think it's a couple of different things. And I try to look at it systemically. I don't know if there's one answer to the whole thing.
right,
I think it's partially environmental, meaning, and I don't mean the human environment, but the natural environment. You know, the from what I've seen in the literature, sperm counts are dropping, testosterone is dropping, and not
yeah,
just for old dudes like us,
yeah,
for like 20s and 30s. All right, so there's something going on in our environments and in the environment that's contributing to a loss of testosterone, sperm count, et cetera, which is a huge problem, you know, species.
right,
Anyways, but also, it's also a problem for young men who need that kind of energy, the testosterone,
yeah,
to engage the world and to build their empire, whatever their empire happens to be. So that in and of itself is a problem. I think it's environmental and food. Like, when I work with my clients, I work on a physiological level. Although I'm a therapist and a coach, like I look at their diet, nutrition, their sleep, their movement and fitness practices, circadian biology, 24-hour day night cycle, stress management, all that stuff like that. And if you're not eating well, you're not sleeping well, you're not living within the 24-hour day night cycle, you're artificially stimulated, too much going on, you're disrupting your whole circadian biology, your whole system,
yeah,
which means you're not going to be able to focus. You're not going to have that grit resilience that you really need. So part of it's physiological, it's a problem. And that part of it's psychological. And I do think there's an attempt at the cultural level and it's called toxic masculinity. And yeah, there are critiques of some humans that are males that act in certain ways and they should be critiqued. Their behavior should be critiqued.
sure,
As an energy force, masculine, feminine, which we all have both,
yeah,
one more than the other, are really important for the survival and thriving of our species. But I think there are cultural forces that are going after the more masculine side of things. And I think that's also very dangerous. And the one example could be, I remember my niece and nephew, they'd watch Disney Channel. And so I'd watch it with him on occasion. And I'm like, going, the way they characterize fathers, as in one example,
Mm,
as bumbling idiots who had no
mm,
engagement with their kids, they're just dumb. The mother's the friends of the kids, and the kids are the smart ones. Like there's a cultural force that's being there's a message that's being forced through that medium of television
yeah.
that I would say is anti-family for one larger thing, but also anti-male. And it doesn't. There's not a lot of role models now on what it means to be a male. Like you don't want to be the macho jerk. You don't want to be the new age wimp, as my friend Triple Lanier would say. I would say that there's a new man that needs to emerge that integrates the positive things from the earlier stages of manhood that we needed. We needed men who could protect their family and their community, literally physically protect. We needed men who could provide, literally monetarily provide. We need men who could procreate, obviously continue the species. Because of our society today, there's a lot less physical threats to us. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be capable of protecting yourself and your family,
Yeah.
but I would say the protection mechanisms against culture, government propaganda, Hollywood, Madison Avenue, less about like midnight marauders coming through the to attack your house, although that can be a problem for some people, or the provider, like wives work. Not every wife's work, but like men don't have to be the full provider financially for their family. So let's rethink what it means to be a provider. Maybe you provide emotional safety, mental stimulation, those kind of things. So we don't have role models of what it means to be a man if you want to take those three things, procreator, protector, and provider, and kind of update them for the 21st century. We need more men out there doing those kind of things as role models for their boys and for their girls too. So girls know how they should be treated when they're women. They're starting to date. That's not cookie dirt.
Yeah, it's such a complex problem. Yet I feel like there's a well, I don't want to say there's a simple solution, but it feels to me, and I've heard this from my son, he's 22, that he feels like the messaging to him. Let me give you an analogy here, Michael. I'm a big guy, 6'5", 280, always was the big kid growing up. My son, same thing, the big kid growing up. Generally, the children who are the largest kids on the playground, so to speak, they're always told, oh, don't knock over the smaller children, don't be too rough because you're bigger than them, right? It's that messaging, the constant messaging of you are bigger, you are stronger, heavier, whatever it is, and you are a problem because of that. And it feels like to me in the last 20 years that same type of messaging has gone out to males of don't even think of walking up to a girl your age in the bar, at the gym, or whatever, and engage her in conversation. Don't do anything that's too masculine, because now it becomes labeled toxic masculinity, which was thrown around far too much in the last 10 years. And so you have what are a group of incels who now just basically live in their parents' basements and don't know what to do at all, and they just hate the world. But you have even the confident young males like my son and his peer group that kind of just sit back and are like, they're just waiting for cues, right? They're waiting for cues from society to be like, can I do this? Is this okay? And then you have your third type, which are the ones that just don't give a shit, and they're going to do whatever they want. I guess they'll suffer consequences as a result. But you're right. The male role model and we don't watch TV anymore. So now the male role model is on YouTube videos, and it's in streams, and everything online. And it's so confusing. And I even thought about, the courting stage of dating. Young men and women don't call each other boyfriend and girlfriend anymore much. That seems to be sort of an outdated thing for them. They don't even say I'm seeing somebody. Like they may have someone they see on the regular, but it's just completely different. And the courting stage happens all online.
Yeah.
There's no serendipitous meeting a person, male or female, either way, in a shopping mall, or because kids don't go to the mall anymore, or even at school and things like that. It kind of just everything is okay. We're going to test each other out by texting back and forth, or I'll like your Instagram post. And I realize that's what today is. I realize this is this not going away. It's just the way it is. But man, it's just changed human interaction and human connection so much. And like you said, sperm counts are down. And there's I think it was Scott Galloway, he said 30% of people under the age of 33 still live with their parents. A third. He goes,
Yeah.
it was back in
Yeah,
the
'cause,
1970s and 80s, it was like 12%, because as soon as you were 18 and out of high school, you were out at the door.
yeah, and I would say that, in generally speaking, that would be fine if you're an ethnic family, because that's kind of par for the course of their
Right.
family tradition, like especially in other countries. But I'd be really curious on why parents allow their kids to stay at home for that length of period of time and don't literally push them out to go get their own place and a job.
I have
It's,
an
I mean,
idea.
please.
I believe, and I actually posted this to LinkedIn. I believe that the Gen X parent, so that would be you, that would be me, the Gen X parent, we were the feral children of the streets when we grew up in the 70s and 80s. It's like we'd leave the house, as soon as the sun was up or as soon as we woke up, we were gone all day and we came home maybe to eat or as soon as the street lights came on. That was the first generation of our parents, the boomer parents, both working. Okay. So now it's like, hey, when you get home from school, there's food in the fridge, just watch TV, don't burn down the house. So we were left to our own devices, and not devices in the way people think now, but just to like watch TV, have eat, and we kind of raised ourselves to a certain extent. But what caused now Gen X, who became parents in the late 90s and early 2000s, we kind of said, okay, we're not going to do that to our children because the world's a scary place now, and with the advent of social media and the internet, and we're not going to leave our kids home alone. In fact, a lot of parents tried to have a parent at home when they got home after school, and we helicoptered the shit out of them. And it became the norm, and we intervened with their teachers and we intervened with their coaches. And I'm putting my hand up on that one. I did it too, because that was what you did as a parent of a young millennial or a Gen Z child. And that's why I think they're, and we tried to become their friends, Mike. That was the other thing.
Yeah.
We tried, our parents were not our friends. I mean, they loved us and we loved them back, but they weren't our friends in the 70s and 80s. They were our parents and we called them mom and dad. Now kids call their parents by their first names and they live at home with them like they're roommates. I have a roommate. I don't have a son or a daughter. I have a roommate. That's where I think things kind of completely flipped the script, is that we tried to become our kids' friends, and now they're like, well, the cost of living isn't helping, but it's like, yeah, I'm going to stay at home as long as I possibly can. So now we've got a bunch of late 20-year-olds who haven't even barely had a date. Like you said, rites of passage earlier. I love that because it has been a rite of passage. It was when you did lose your virginity, it was a big deal, and you shared that with your friends and it was kind of cool, and it was like, man, what happened? Or that first drink you took, or when you turned 16 and got your car license, or when you had the first opportunity to, and that doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, and I would say those are very American cultural phenomenon for rituals, from boyhood to manhood or girlhood to womanhood. But I'd say I would encourage families to start creating ones that are more spiritually oriented, that are character developing.
Hmm.
We used to have that as a part of a spiritual religious ritual, bar mitzvah in the Jewish tradition, is in the Catholic Christian tradition, and they still happen. But they don't necessarily change consciousness. You want things that change consciousness. People, their character changes as a result of having this experience or a series of experience. They become more responsible. They become more sovereign. They become more adult-like, and various other characters, maybe more loving and caring, compassion. All the various things you might want to help develop them, so you can push them out into the world and they can live their lives and not live in your basement, as
Yeah.
you're suggesting.
Yeah, we could go down that rabbit hole for hours.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your journey into personal development. I'm
Okay.
really loving this conversation, Mike. But if I read it correctly, yeah, like your first steps in that journey of personal development began at a very young age. I believe it was at age 8 or 9.
Yeah.
Explain that. How does someone find that at such a young age?
So I was really lucky, and I'll tell you an experience that I had with a psychiatrist, and I'll share your experience I had with a therapist. So at age 9, I went to see a psychiatrist. And with my mom, I was a hair puller. There's a clinical diagnosis. It's
Yep.
an obsessive compulsive disorder. It's a way to deal. At the time, it's a way to deal with my stress. I had school challenges. I had health challenges. Dot dot dot. And the story that my mom tells is that I finished seeing the psychiatrist at the end of the session. I turned to her. I said, "He's fat. He smokes. He can't help himself. How's he going to help me?" And I walked out of the room. Pretty obnoxious for a 9-year-old, but that's what I did. Fortunately, my mom agreed with me, just to an extent. And she found me a therapist, Mrs. Pat Lawson. Mrs. Lawson was a biofeedback expert. So in 1979, you can imagine the technology wasn't that great. I learned biofeedback for self-regulation. I learned guided meditation, managing
Wow.
the mind. I learned meditation, managing emotions and the mind. And then she pushed me into the martial arts. So I got into martial arts, which I didn't
That's pretty woo-woo for a young child in the 70s. Hey?
especially since I wasn't in California. Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yes. I was in Washington, D.C. metro area. So that was even,
Right.
yeah, I wasn't in San Francisco or something like that. Yeah, so that started me off, and the first 3 books I purchased as a kid, literally I bought them for myself in 1979 and 1980, were No Mind, Zen Mind, No Mind by Daiso Suzuki, a book called Zen and the Martial Arts, and a book on yoga. Now, did I know what I was reading at age 9? I still couldn't read those books to understand what I'm reading, but for whatever reason, I was drawn deeply to the Taoism, Buddhism, yoga philosophy, and I explored that literally for the rest of my life, as well as other traditions.
Well,
Yeah.
that's an incredible story because obviously that's not the norm. I mean, it's not the norm for a young child, even any child to be, unless their parents exposed them to it, right? If your parents were yoga instructors, or like you said, there was a therapy background, but you were exposed to it, and a lot of kids would maybe push back against it because it's what their parents did. But you obviously embraced that. Did that continue through high school? Did it continue to develop it through university and
Yeah, so
where you were
it's
growing?
always it was always a private, deep interest of mine. So like I read East West Journal as a kid in high school, and ended up being a lot of people I read about. I ended up studying in grad school or studying with in grad school, which is kind of really cool. Like I first read about Ken Wilber. I read about Dr. Stan Grof. Stan Grof was an LSD researcher from Czechoslovakia in the 50s, came to the US in the 60s. I read about Ken Wilber, who I ended up working with at part of the Integral Institute. He's an integral philosopher. So, I was always deeply studying like kind of alternative spirituality, alternative health, alternative medicine, all kind of the alternatives, fitness, nutrition, all that kind of stuff as a kid. But as a private interest, that always continued. I was always reading, studying, learning, practicing new things, sit in meditation for hours at a time in my basement. I'd watch Enter the Dragon over and over again, my favorite Bruce Lee movie. So I was ensconced in kind of the personal development, mostly from more of an Eastern tradition at the time. But it didn't, I can share with you when it became professional versus a private interest, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was actually in the middle of an MBA program. And I was doing fine in the MBA program. And unfortunately, a dear friend of mine since kindergarten was murdered.
Mm.
And it caused me to kind of have the dark night of the soul. Oh my God, what am I doing with my life? And then a month later, a teacher committed suicide. So I just kind of added on to it. And the realization that I had in that moment is like, I really have no interest in business, MBAs at the time, nothing of that. Like I was doing fine, but I'm really interested in all this other stuff that you and I've been talking about, the personal development, growth, and spirituality, and somatics, and nutrition, fitness, health optimization. I'm like, that's what I really want to go study. And next thing I know, I'm in California getting my graduate degree on. I'm doing my postgraduate studies. My graduate study was in transpersonal counseling psychology. My postgraduate work was in somatic or body psychology. So I literally took what I've been studying my whole life as a child, as a kid, got it formalized in the graduate level education, and then started doing it professionally soon thereafter.
Wow. That's quite the journey. I want to get into the transpersonal stuff in a second, but I want to go back a little bit. The effort over results philosophy that I have embraced and given a name to basically speaks to we're a results outcome obsessed society. This is what I think causes especially young people, and I'm working on that with my kids right now, but it causes them to become less resilient, to continue to preach about results and outcomes and what are you going to do with your life and things like that, and as adults as well. So Let me give you an example, Michael, and because I think effort over results really connects to what you teach and the message you bring, in that my daughter, and this is the first chapter of my book, was born talented, athletic, talented, smart, intellectual, okay? Right out of the womb. And all of her growing up years, we basically told her, "Oh, you're so talented, you're so smart, you're so athletic, good job winning that race," and so forth. When she eventually reached an age and this is sports now, an athletic division where she wasn't winning and she wasn't the smartest person in the class, and so she didn't know how to handle it. And she had no resilience because she'd never faced adversity before, and it really affected her. And so with our son, who is 2 years her junior, he wasn't as talented, still talented, and we probably didn't recognize how talented he was because she was like crazy talented. But we kept telling him, just keep putting the work in, buddy. You know what? Just keep working hard. You'll get there. It's gonna happen. Just keep putting in the hours. And his approach now has always been, all I can control is my effort and my attitude. And that sounds cliche, but it's true. And he is far more resilient because of it. And so maybe I hope my daughter doesn't hear this podcast, but it's different. And so what I try to bring in the effort over results philosophy to teachers who are teaching, to coaches who are coaching young athletes, to employers and their employees, stop focusing so much on the end result. Stop saying, well, you didn't hit your sales targets this month. Or stop, you didn't get a 90, you don't have an A average in school. Why didn't you make the A team for hockey? It's like, all you're doing is beating down their confidence, and you're not creating any resilience, and they're certainly not going to want to try to challenge themselves for fear of failure, because all they know is win or lose, succeed or fail. And so now, going back to the message that you bring, I'd like to think that it is more about, all we can do is what we can do. We need to stop comparing ourselves to others, because comparison is the thief of joy, right? And put the work in. Eventually the results will come. We don't know what they are. Goal setting is fine. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against goal setting. I'm not against enjoying a result or an outcome, but it's the journey, it's the process, it's what you learned through thick and thin to get to that point. Does that resonate with, your teachings, your learnings, and what you bring to your clients?
It definitely does. One of the things we haven't discussed yet is I spent a decade working with Commander Mark Devine at SEALFIT.
Hmm.
Them create and run various programs of his. And the concept he teaches, which I espouse, is 20x. We're capable of doing 20 times more than we think we are. But we need to be putting ourselves in situations that really test us and show us what we're capable of and what we're not capable of. And we can work on, here's some, it's not to beat yourself up, but like, oh, here's a place I need to continually progress. And in SEAL Fit is a lot more physical challenges, as you can imagine, because kind of Navy SEAL oriented is emotional resilience and mental toughness and physical capability building. But that's true in all areas of life, interpersonally, cognitively, emotionally, spiritually. Like, I always encourage my clients to be comfortable getting uncomfortable. You want to continually put yourself in situations, whether physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, interpersonal, or various combinations of those things, to show you where you're at and to keep pushing the boundary, keep pushing the boundary, keep pushing the boundary. Not for negative health outcomes, it's physical, but you gotta be mindful of these things. But like, the more you're capable of pushing yourself and pushing yourself and pushing yourself, then when life comes your way and kicks you in the nuts, or if you're a female, wherever body part, like, you're much more capable of dealing with it. You're not going to collapse.
Yeah.
You're going to be able to not only survive but thrive. I like to say, smile at adversity. It's coming. You can choose one or two things. Okay, that's not really okay. A lot of people do that. Or you can say, oh, here's an opportunity. Here's an opportunity for me to see who I am, what I'm capable of. I can learn some lessons here, and I can grow as a human being. Awesome. Much more better, in my opinion. Much more better mindset. And it's less about the end outcome. It's more about the journey through that process, continually pushing yourself to see who you are, and creating challenges to lead you to who you want to be into the future.
Yeah, and I'm an Andrew Huberman. I geek out on his
Nice.
podcasts, and
Yeah.
it was his podcast that turned me on to Dr. Carol Dweck and the growth mindset, and that's really what started my journey those last 5 years. But he
Nice.
speaks to the anterior mid-cingulate cortex and how that part of the brain grows stronger and firmer because you're challenging yourself. Even if you don't win, even if you don't succeed at something, constantly challenging yourself and pushing your boundary a little bit further keeps building that, and it's a muscle. Like it basically now becomes a muscle to where you don't know any different than to keep challenging yourself, and it kind of it craves it. And this is the one thing that I mean, I know people could say, we pushed our kids into sports and we kept pushing them, but it wasn't to push them because I wanted them to be the captain of the team and win championships. I wanted to push them to see how far they could push themselves. And like what are your limits? Like are you better than this? And that's but the messaging wasn't great. So when we finally turned the messaging around and said, I don't care what the outcome is, as long as you just continue to put the effort in and you worked hard at it. That's all we ask for as parents, as coaches, as educators, and so forth. So that's interesting. I love that.
Can I share the
Yeah,
exact opposite of what I just said?
yeah. Okay.
Which is also a challenge. So when I was at SEALFIT, we attract a lot of guys. They're women too, but a lot of guys who are like, I want to do the next Go Ruck. I want to do the next. Well, actually, Go Ruck just started. I want to do the next Spartan Race or Tough Mudder, or we did Coco Camp Hell Week, or the next really big thing. And I just noticed a pattern. I was like, yeah, it's great. Train out for that. It's really good for your physical capability and mental toughness, emotional resilience. But I'm like, what are they running for? Like, why do they keep having to prove something to themselves that they're capable of doing the next big thing, the next big thing, the next big thing? So for some of the guys, as in getting to know them, I saw that as a healthy thing. For some of the guys, I'm like, does seem like a real healthy thing. So I came up with a concept to balance out Mark 20X called negative 20X, Commander Divine at SEALFIT. Negative 20X is like, maybe what you need to do is not more stuff, but less stuff. Instead of running away from yourself by doing all these things, maybe you need to sit with yourself. So I remember I had a client who loved doing these challenges. And I said, here's my challenge to you. Don't train for a month, because he loved like 2 or 3 hours in the gym every day. And he was getting ready for the next thing. It's like, hey, minimal dose just so you can stay healthy, but no 2 or 3 hours in the gym. Don't do an event, and just be with yourself. He hated it.
Yeah.
What he discovered is like he was burning off emotions. He's burning off things about his relationships that he didn't want to have to deal with. Him sitting quietly with himself, he's like, oh shit, there's some stuff in my relationship with my mother. There's some stuff in relation with my wife I didn't want to deal with. I'd rather climb a real mountain or whatever it is than engage in a conversation with these people. So I think it's yeah.
Go ahead.
No, please.
No, I love that you flip the script on it, right? It's because you're right. I think there are some people out there who continue to challenge themselves out of insecurity and out of the need to continually to build their confidence. It's kind of like the person who screams affirmations at themselves in the mirror every day. It's like, is that really doing anything for you? And don't get me wrong, challenging yourself, but there's a boundary, there's a line there between, yeah, I want to see if I can do that, to I need to be challenged constantly, because if I don't, then I feel like I'm nothing. And I think you found the antidote for that, which is the negative 20, I think you called it, the minus 20, where it's like, can you not do that, the thing that you love? It's the same thing with addictions, right? It's like, can you go a week without drinking? Can you go a day without drinking? There's so many different psychological advantages to the opposite of what we think we should do. It's just finding the right forum for that. So does this have to do with tell me about transpersonal psychology, because I love that term, and I'm once again, I geek out on human psychology. I always have, even though I think teaching is about the closest I came to having to deal with people who needed a lot of psychological help. But tell me about transpersonal psychology.
Yeah, so trans means through and beyond. So it's transpersonal, through and beyond the personal. Nothing to do with the trans movement that we have here in the U.S.
Yep.
So there's multiple different ways of thinking about it. My favorite way of talking about is all religious systems have spiritual practices whose intention is to expand the mind, or expand consciousness, open the heart, free the body, and perhaps, depending on the religious system, get you in touch with your soul, or have a relationship with the divine, or whatever it happens to be, depending on the religious system. They all have practices: meditation, yogic breathing. Yogic breathing is from the yoga tradition, but a lot of traditions have breathing practices. Chanting, as example, sensory deprivation. There's some pain-inducing techniques, especially some of the Native Americans have, and Shia use in Islam. Psychedelics, plant medicine. So there's a lot of different tools that various cultures have utilized as part of religious system to induce spiritual states of consciousness or non-ordinary states of consciousness. So when I was in grad school, we studied object relations and self-psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy, and family systems, all the normal schools. But then we also studied these various practices which change consciousness. Because it's one thing to cognitively get something, but like you know, at least in my experience, my work, it's like it's not just enough that I know it. You got to actually experience it in your whole system. You need to shift your consciousness. And the consciousness is not just in the brain, it's in the nervous system, it's in the organ system, it's the whole human system. And these practices, whether it's the breath practices or sacred medicine or meditation, if used appropriately, can change consciousness and change how you experience yourself and the world around you. That's one way of thinking about transpersonal psychology. You're using these practices to transcend your limited understanding and identity of who you think you are. You're expanding your identity, or you're even just identifying from the ego, and you're connecting. If you want to think about the monotheistic religions, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, your soul. Different traditions have different ways of describing some similar things, but like, so you are transcending your limited self sense, and these practices help you do that.
Does
For example, to like,
Yeah, give me an example because I think it'll answer my question.
okay, so I'll stick with plant medicine. If that's okay.
Yeah.
And when I say plant medicines, not necessarily specifically to plants, we also have artificial medicines like LSD, MDMA, but
Yeah.
like mushrooms, ayahuasca, ibogaine. So if you think about MDMA, which is ecstasy on the street, but it's been used in couples therapy for a longest period of time until the DEA criminalized it. It's been studied here in the U.S. and it hopefully should be reduced. Its scheduling should change soon to have medical use. But it's been shown to be effective, for instance, with combat veterans PTS or PTSD, more popularly known. And you can imagine that combat veteran or someone who's suffered deep trauma, they come back from the incident and and they walk around sympathetically activated. They're always on guard and they're locked down and rigid, understandably so. So that's a particular identity that they've created in how they engage the world. And it usually fits with their own pattern that they created when they're a little kid. So for instance, I do a lot with veterans and I work with a veteran, and he had a particular trauma response when he was a kid. And the trauma response is to shut down. So his PTSD exemplified itself as a shutting down. I work with other veterans whose early childhood experiences become aggressive. So when they get triggered, they become aggressive, even more aggressive with the PTSD is activated.
Yeah.
So there's an identity that's created, and the PTSD locks it further into place, or maybe it modifies it slightly. So, for instance, in the right setting, someone takes MDMA and they have a heart opening experience, and they can see themselves with deep care and compassion. They can see who they are prior to the wounding from the PTS or combat, let's say combat. They can see themselves who they really were before the wounding from their engagement. Maybe their family member sexually abused them, or there's alcohol or drug abuse in the family, and they weren't well taken care of, emotional abuse, mental abuse, whatever it is. And so they can have deep compassion for themselves, experience who they were prior to all the programming, which created what I would call hard armor we wear to protect ourselves against the world. And they can relax into who they really are. Now, it's an experience that lasts 4 to 6 to 8 hours. It can last for many days after that because there's a learning period. So you got to continue to do work to keep the heart open and the body relaxed, and you in touch with your new identity or your old identity, really, without all the personality stuff built on to protect yourself.
Yeah.
That could be an example of many ways of talking about it, of like a transpersonal experience, because you're transcending that identity that you created. The medicine opens you up to who you truly are, and that, like, ooh, that's who I really am. That's who I want to operate in the world from. That's an example of a transpersonal understanding of that experience.
Have you ever taken part in a MDMA exercise like yourself, or seen those, like I've seen them on documentaries and I've seen it on, you know, some YouTube videos. And the thing that, and I'll full disclosure, I have done, you know, THC, I've done, you know, I guess you could call them edibles, and gotten to a point, a state where it's like, yeah, I feel like it's an out of body experience, and I'm seeing and feeling and hearing things that, not hearing things, but you know what I'm saying? It's like my mind thinks differently. But being a control person, somewhat OCD, it really battles that. But tell me about some of the things you've either experienced personally or that you've seen in others where it's completely changed their lives, whether PTSD or an obsessive compulsive disorder or childhood trauma.
And you kind of nailed away. We could talk about THC is also a plant medicine
Yeah.
used appropriately. But so I actually did my master's thesis on the therapeutic uses of LSD and MDMA in the late 90s. So I've been tracking this field for a long time.
Nice.
Love maps, who's gotten this all this research moving forward. So hopefully some of these medicines can be legally and available to human beings here in the States. Case study, one of the case studies I used in my master's thesis was of a woman who literally hated her mother. And because of her hatred to her mother, she would not engage the world in a healthy way. Like, her hatred of her mother kept her from literally engaging with her own husband, other people. Like, she just walked her. I mean, she don't walk around saying out loud, "I hate my mother. I hate my mother."
No.
But you're working with her. You're like, she has a mother. She's going on. And because of the programming from her relationship with her mother, it showed up in how she related to her husband, how she related to her kids, in a very controlled manner, very slightly angry manner, very passive aggressive manner. She did MDMA, and her experience was to be able to see her mother lying in bed. And she saw her mother first as her mother, and she's like, oh, she had all these feelings about her mother, which is fine, but you want to process the feelings. But then she saw her mother as a little girl,
Mm.
and she literally could see her mother getting damage from her own experience growing up into the mother, a woman, and then eventually mother. So this client could see her mom as a wounded child and understand why she did what she did as a mother. Now, it doesn't mean you necessarily accept poor behavior from another human being, but allowed her to have some compassion for her mom. She's like, oh
Yeah.
my God, now I know why she did what she did.
Yeah.
It wasn't really even particular to me. It's just like she was damaged. I think the mother was sexually abused by her father, something along those lines. So because she had compassion for her mother, especially her mother as a little girl, she flipped it around. She started having compassion for herself. She started having compassion for her own little girl who got wounded by her mother. And then she could have some compassion for herself as an adult. And she kind of let go of all that anger. She, forgave the mother. She forgave herself the different, and this is all in the medicine setting. She wasn't actually engaging in a conversation with her mother. And because of that, she could relax. And because she could relax in her system, she didn't always have to be on guard, protected, sympathetically activated, ready for the fight, ready to protect herself. She could then show up in a more loving, caring way to her husband, her kids, their friends. So that is an example of like she transcended her identity. I'm an angry woman. To like, no, I'm a really loving woman, a loving human being. And then she could live that out more fully in real life.
The parent child relationship is interesting and unique, because I think children hold a certain amount of, you know, contempt for their parents and the way they were raised until they become they become parents themselves, and B, when they do finally get to that point of understanding why their parents acted and did what they did. Because there's no, number one, there's no handbook for parenting. I mean, there's lots out there, but I mean, which one is perfectly correct? None of them. Every situation's different. So that, and everyone has their own childhood experiences and trauma, whether it be light or heavy, that they carry into parenthood, and they parent their children the way they feel is, I guess, correct or the right way to do it in the moment. But it's obviously as a result of how they were raised or experiences they experienced as a child. And it's interesting. You know, you finally have that conversation with your son or daughter at some point where they go, you know what, Dad, I kind of figured it out now, why you did what you did, or the way why you told me this or whatever. And that's kind of a beautiful moment. And so it was nice to hear that story because she held so much hatred for her mother. And when you finally become, and this kind of goes back to the curious and judgmental thing. It's like when you finally dig deep into who that person, your mother, was and why she was the way she was, or father, whoever, caregiver, it really can transform people. But that's interesting. The transpersonal stuff is really interesting. It's a heightened consciousness. Are there any people you've worked with that have really just pushed back hard on some of the practices that you use with them?
It's like you're like a mind reader, like bringing up everything from like the last 2 weeks. I really was having this thought this morning with a client of mine. I won't name him because I don't want to name anyone, but so I work with him as part of a couple, and he pushed back like for a year on everything. Because I have practices that I recommend. He's like, "Oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that." And I literally got a call from him like about 2 years after I worked with him, and they had some breakthroughs and they were doing well. And he's like, Michael, just want to let you know, I realize how dumb I've been. I was like, I fought against all your practices you gave us. I don't know why. I just started implementing one of them like about a month ago, and this is the best thing. It's now a sacred practice that we do every night. And my takeaway from that is like, when people are ready to hear, they'll hear it. Not everything I recommend is necessarily the perfect thing for anyone at any time. It might be good for them later, it might be good for them in the past, might be good for them now, it might not be good for them. My whole thing is experiment. Try these things out. See if it works for you. If it doesn't, cool. Try it later. It might work for you 5 years from now or a month from now. But I really like I had to laugh because I remember the conversations with him. It's like, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do this. And okay, it's going to affect your marriage, but cool. And actually I saw him about a year ago, which is a couple years after this whole thing. And he literally took this one exercise, which I had recommended for that whole year. And like I said, it's literally a sacred practice. They do it every night, no matter what. Even if they have family in town, they close the door and do this practice because it's so important to him. And the funny thing on his side is like, it's like, I don't want to interfere with he'd watch baseball, he'd watch basketball, he'd watch football. He's really big in sports. Like, I don't want to interfere with those things. Those are things that are really important to me by doing your exercise because that's when they're on at night. And I was like, I still love those things. My wife is a little bit more important than sports. And I really love these 20 minutes I spend with her. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Us humans are funny.
Yeah, I bet. Michael, how important is daily routine and ritual?
Man, so the joke is we're Americans. We order right now from Amazon. It arrived yesterday. Okay. Like instant gratification. We
Yeah,
don't even like instant. We want it like earlier.
yeah.
And I would say, and I think biohacking kind of fits into that. And I'm a biohacker and I can share some of the things I've done. However, I think that question is so important. We all need, and I think if you benefit from daily rituals. I have all my clients do AM rituals as well as transitional rituals, transitioning from work to home or home to work, depending on what's going on. AM rituals, PM rituals, daily practices, technologies they might use on a regular basis. And they don't have to necessarily do, I'm going to do 3 hours in the morning before I start my day. Nothing like that. I mean, although that's kind of cool for some people. But like I would say first thing in the morning, I would reflect on what's the best thing for me to do right now to really get my whole human system ready to take on the day. Rehydrate, pretty simple one. Drink water, a little bit of lemon. Well, that's pretty easy. Some movement practices. Hey, maybe your thing isn't to go to the gym first thing in the morning, but there's some really great Tai Chi or yoga practices you can do for 5 to 10 minutes just to loosen up the body and get the energy moving. Or do some gratitude practices. Literally 2, 3 minutes of gratitude. There's a 5 minute gratitude journal I really like. Try it out. Just get your heart open and just being grateful for your life. Even if your life sucks at this moment, there's got to be things you can be grateful for.
Yeah.
And then how do you get your mind ready to take on the day? I have a particular practice that I do. It's a kind of a guided meditation practice where I go through some character traits that I want to make sure I embody that day. I walk through them, and any one that stands out in my mind's eye is like talking to me. I'm like, oh, I need to really focus in on that one. And now throughout the rest of the day, let's just say, for example, it's being present. Like I need to be more present in my relationships. And I clearly define what that means for me. I go from abstract to very concrete. Here are the 5 behaviors that indicate I'm being present. It's like, so part of my morning ritual is like, okay, I'm going to be present. I'm going to be present to myself, my breath, my thoughts, my emotions, my energetics, my movement. also be present to my friends, family members, coworkers, and stuff like that. And at the end of the day, I can assess myself. How well did I do being present? As one example. How well did I do pulling that gratitude to my heart to so I can be more loving and compassionate? Did I move my body throughout the day, or I sit at my computer all day long? Keep the energy flowing. So I love daily practices, daily rituals, and I include them, like I just said, as part of the beginning of the day and then the end of the day for my clients.
What's one daily protocol? And once again, I refer back to Andrew Huberman because I kind of I went overboard, and it was like, okay, every morning it's a cold plunge. It's looking at the sun rising for my rods and cones.
Right on.
I drank my AG1s. I did
Yeah.
and it got to a point actually where it was obsessive. And when I missed a week, like we went on vacation and I missed a week of being able to do that, and it totally threw me off. But I digress in saying that what is one daily protocol that you think everyone can practice that is helpful and can have impact on their life?
I'll say a gratitude practice. I think people being kinder to themselves and one another get a good start. And if you can walk around with an open heart and grateful for being alive, that's just one thing. It's pretty, a lot of people don't have that.
Yeah.
And just being grateful for the people in your life. And part of being grateful for the people in your life is if your morning gratitude practice is at least choose one person you're grateful for. Maybe it's a teacher you had 20 years ago. Maybe it's your father, your parents, and maybe it's a close friend. Someone who did something yesterday or 5 years ago or 30 years ago. Reach out to them. Not only feel the gratitude so you have a good heart for the rest of the day, thank them, call them up, Zoom with them, text them, DM them on Facebook, whatever your thing is. Just say, hey, Joe, 20 years ago, you did X, Y, and Z, and I've just been thinking about it, and I really, really appreciate that. One thing, you're reconnecting with someone from your past, which is a beautiful thing. Another thing is you just don't know how that could affect that person. That they might spread it forward, which would be a really nice thing.
It's interesting you mentioned that, and we bring this up because I opened up LinkedIn and messages, and there was a message from a woman that I had gone to grade school with. So we're talking 40 some years ago. We've run into each other here and there, and she's a police officer here in the city. And out of nowhere, and I've been going through my own struggles lately with work and things like that. And out of nowhere, she messaged me and she goes, "Hey Quinn, just continue being you." I was like, where did that come from? But I wasn't upset about it. I messaged her back and I said, that's exactly what I needed to hear today. And it was incredible the impactful effect that had on me. And my wife and I do it regularly. Like we have this sort of it's almost like ritual now. It's like if you think of somebody, they just happen to pop into your mind. There's a reason for that, and if you can access them through a DM, a text, or whatever, because you have connection somehow, reach out to them and just say, "Hey, I was just thinking about you. Hope everything's good." Okay.
I would say that's a transpersonal practice
Okay, there you go.
because you're possibly accessing information that's non-sensory,
Yeah.
possibly. We don't know exactly for sure, but like if someone comes to your mind, maybe it's because they need to come to your mind for those very purposes. They need to hear.
And I think that gratitude thing is I started doing that. I had a gratitude journal and just writing things down daily. I'm not much into journaling. I have a hard time actually putting pen to paper. In fact, I think I've lost the ability to write like a lot of us have. But I do, when I do take the time to do that, and I think about the things I've been complaining about lately, and then I think about all the great things that I have going on in my life, it does change. I mean, the neuroplasticity in that is real.
Yes.
And if every day you can think of something or a few things that you're grateful for, and it doesn't have to be like a Thanksgiving dinner type mantra where it's like, I'm thankful for my kids and I'm thankful it's like, no, like truly absorb and get fully absorbed into it of what you are thankful for. And my wife and I once in a while have to stop ourselves and say, we're healthy, the kids are healthy. We have a roof over our heads. Yeah, gas is, $6 a gallon, but hey, we can afford to put, gas in the vehicles, little things like that. And I don't think people gain that perspective. And I think that takes some wisdom and experience and maturity to do that. I think it's very hard for younger people to do that because they're so self-centered.
Yeah.
We all were. in that age. But yeah, the gratitude practice is pretty incredible. I remember I keep referring to Huberman, but he brought up prayer on a podcast, and it's funny because being a hardcore scientist, you wouldn't think that would reconcile itself with prayer and faith. And I remember he was on Cameron Haynes' podcast, and Cam had asked him about that, and he goes, "It just works."
If you want to check out Elizabeth Targ, Dr. Elizabeth Targ. She's the daughter of Russell Targ, who is with the Stanford Research Institute.
Yeah.
He did some amazing research on kind of psychic phenomena, but she also did research on prayer and its efficacy. Like research. And so
Yeah.
anyone who's a scientist was like, yeah, it's all nonsense. Like literally look her up and you can find the research that shows that it's an effective way of changing outcomes in other people's lives.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, and I'm certainly not qualified to comment on it, but it feels to me like there's an energy. So for me, for example, I really want to be on a TEDx stage one day doing a TEDx talk.
Mhm.
And you throw that out there to the universe, and people hear that, and it's in their mind, and somehow the energy comes back to you. It's like karma, whatever you want to call it. But
Right on.
I think that's where prayer kind of comes into play, where it's like you're putting out that energy to the universe, to the world, and however it comes back. But I think people who have faith, and there are people who will say, be detractors of that, but hey, if you have something that you believe in that makes you a better person, that makes your life more fulfilled and more and has more what's wrong with that? And I think Christianity really took a deep hit in the late 1990s and certainly in the 2000s, to the point where it seemed like if you even mentioned you were a Christian, you were shunned. And it seems to be the tides are turning a little bit now, because I think people are more open-minded. But that's an interesting thing, the prayer thing. And I've been praying lately. There's been a lot of things going on in my life, and what I go back to, what I have to remember, it's that I can only control my own effort, and I kind of have to leave the rest up to the universe or God, or what have you. So sorry, I kind of fell into a hole there.
That's all good, man.
I really appreciate the conversation, Michael. This is good that you're allowing me to speak this way, and you're bringing that out in me, which is awesome. Let's talk about future vision, and wrap things up here. So what emerging trends are you seeing in personal development? Like, because obviously you probably do professional development yourself, and you like to expand on what you can provide to your clients. So what emerging trends are you seeing in resilience, personal development, and those areas?
So I'd say you brought up Huberman. So I think Huberman's a really important exemplar of what I'm about to share. How do you look at the human system physiologically and optimize it? Really important question. Because, if you feel like shit, you don't have the energy, you're not vital, it's kind of hard to do the cool shit you want to do in your life. It's hard to be psychologically mature and engaging. So I think we're learning so much more about epigenetics, the environmental effects on genetic expression and how we experience life in our own system, that light and sound have an effect, that the food we eat has an effect, other environmental factors that have an effect on our human system. So like all of that information is really vital and really important. And so I think I'm seeing more and more people paying attention to their diet, their consumption of the news or other information sources. Like, oh, they realize it's propaganda.
Yeah.
Cool. But we're being propagandized by the government, by media, by Hollywood, by Madison Avenue. I think more and more people not only being aware of what they consume in terms of food, but also in terms of information. And the opposite is true too. We're being overwhelmed by all kinds of information too. We can have that conversation. But I would say, environmental factors, natural environmental factors, becoming more aware of them. Like you said, you get to watch the sunrise or watch the sunset because it affects positively your circadian biology. That's becoming more and more prominent. So you're down your physiology, you're more psychologically sound. I think that's piece of it. I'll say another piece. I do some work in the longevity space, and as cool as it is for the peptide, we can talk about at some point, or the drugs, or the diet, nutrition, and exercise, all important. The social connection. I think we're finding out more and more that actually being connected to other human beings has a pro-social effect and a pro-health effect. That we actually need other human beings. This isolation that we found ourselves in, especially during COVID,
Yeah.
was completely detrimental to individuals, families, and communities, and that we need more social engagement. So I think that's also a growing trend of people spending more and more time together. I happen to co-lead something called Team Fudoshin, where we do hard physical challenges. It's just a way to get people together to do really cool stuff. But it doesn't have to be that. You could go to your church, your synagogue, your mosque, and do, be in community. A secular group and be in community, or, a book group, or CrossFit gym and do workouts together. Whatever your things are, that's fine. But be around for the most part. Not everyone. A lot of people are introverts; they don't like other human beings. But I think we are learning more and more about being around other human beings, especially people that pull the better part of ourselves out of us, is really important for health and well-being and resilience.
So many great things to talk about, and I believe our audience today really grew from what we did discuss. And like I said, I could talk about this for a couple more hours, but I'm going to let you go. Where can people find you? How can people reach out to you, learn more about the practice that you bring to your clients? And let's talk about your socials and promote you some.
I appreciate that, Quinn. Thank you for having me on. I've enjoyed this conversation. So my website's Michael D, as in David, just letter D, Ostralenk.com. You can see about my individual coaching, my group coaching, my couples work, and Team Fudoshin's on there as well. You can check out Resilience Optimized men's group, learn more about the men's group by co-leading Jason Glick. I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Ostralenk, and then on LinkedIn and Facebook, Michael David Ostralenk. You can find me. And I post pretty much every day. I might take one day off.
Yeah, I checked out all your socials over the last couple of days, and yeah, there's a lot of content there, and it's all incredible. Well, Michael, thank you very much for being on the show. Like I said, I really appreciate everything that you brought to the table today, and our audience appreciates it. And I hope you had a good time too.
Definitely did. Thank you for having me on.